process art discovery, and it's just going to be a wonderful time sharing experiences and information about these beautiful inks. We're going to talk about how to apply the colors and different things that we can do, and I just want to thank you for taking time to join us today. What we're working with is some alcohol inks, and what I'm starting out with here is I have a piece of photo paper. With the photo paper or Yupo paper, we're using the non-porous side. And then I also have a ceramic tile here, and I'm just going to talk about the differences between how the inks move on both. They're both very friendly surfaces to use, but just to give some options and some variations and just to see the difference between the two. So before we get started, we're just going to put a little bit of our blending solution on, and what this is going to do is just remove any debris, dust, fingerprints. What happens with our fingers when they touch the surfaces, they add a little bit of oil, and that's what we don't want. The inks will kind of repel. So we're just going to wipe it down. And nothing too serious, just kind of give it a little rub with some of your blending solution and just make sure there's no kind of like fingerprints or any little dust, because the inks will kind of touch onto those little pieces of dust and kind of leave some little specks that you might not want. All right, so once that's done, you're good to go. So today I'm just going to show you a wet on wet technique. So that's where I put some of the blending solution on the background, and then I'm going to add the inks on the surface of that, and then I'm just going to kind of show how they move around, and then we're going to blend them and then put a tree in there. So I know a lot of times people are like, oh, that's a little intimidating when you look at a tree, and I'm like, you know what? Every tree has its own personality. Every tree has its, journey, and we're just going to allow it to be. So I'm just getting this blending solution moved around on the background, and then I'm just going to come in. So I have a mermaid, and I also have a flamingo, and I'm using two different brands here today. There's also a yellow pinata. The differences between these two inks, one's a little bit heavier, really vibrant, but almost more like paint-like, where the Ranger is a little less heavy and it moves a little faster. So there's a lot of what I call blooming, which is when you put a drop of the ink down, and I'll just show you here. And then all of a sudden it kind of starts moving and growing. And so that's what I call the blooming part. So you can just see how it'll just move around on the background there. So what I'm going to go in and do is I'm just going to start with some flamingo up at the top. We're going to kind of work in some sky here. And then I'm going to come in with a little bit of the yellow in between, and then we're just going to allow these colors to move around a little bit. And as you see, you start out with your flamingo and your yellow, and the next thing you have an orange, and I had some of that mermaid in there, so we're getting some purples. And I just love how the colors just become a new color, just from touching. And sometimes it's good just to let the inks rest, let them just sit, and they'll show you what's next. So we're going to come back in here with a little bit more of our pinata yellow. It's a nice, vibrant one. And if any time you find that your ink is drying around the edges, like you can see here, it's already dried. It's a little bit wet, but it's mainly dried. You can still kind of push that little bit of wetness around, or you can add a little bit of the blending solution, which is like water to paint. And you'll see that all of a sudden it just starts pushing it around, moving it around. And then don't be shy, you just pick up your plates and let it just move. Now the worst case scenario is that you get some colors that overblend. If you get too much of one color in a spot that you don't want, you can just take your paper towel and just make a little corner of it, and you can just go in there and lift some of that out. Okay? And then just let it kind of settle back in. And then just pick her up and move her again. Now if you want it to dry a little bit faster, you can add a little bit of breath. And that just evaporates the iso a little quicker. And you can see the colors just blending and merging as that happens. And I'm just going to go to the other side, and I'm just going to let her sit down, and then she's just going to blend. And I'm going to add a bit more of my, what do we got here? This is my mermaid. Try to get a bit of a skyline. I'm going to come into the bottom, and we're going to add a bit of mushroom, create kind of a foreground. Now if you like using your brushes, that's not a problem. You can take your brush and you can just push that color right to the edges, anywhere you want it to go. And you can drag it around, watch the colors mix and mingle. And just allow things to show you what they like to do. And again, we're going to take that mermaid into our mushroom here. We're going to pull these colors together and get some texture for our foreground. And just let it show you what it's going to do. And you can give it a bit of breath. And you'll just see the colors expand, kind of take on a bit of texture. And just kind of let it do its thing there. Just going to pull the color out to the edge. And I got a bit of a white spot in the center here, and I'm just going to kind of let it be for a bit. See if I want to do something with that. Just pulling some of my other colors down to the bottom. And you can see already the magic is happening. And I think that's what I love most about these inks, is that when they dry, they're as vibrant as when they came out of the bottle. Okay, so I got a bit of a dark wave in my sky here, so I'm going to come in and I'm just going to tap a bit of that out because it's a little bit more than I would like at this point. And then I'm just going to let that breathe for a little bit and move my colors to the side a little. And in this dish here, I just got some of the blending solution to clean out my brush. A little paper towel, dab it off. And then I'm just going to pull this other ink over to the side. It's a little wet still. And we're just going to add a little bit of flamingo in there. And don't be afraid to experiment, because that's where some of the best things come. It's just in that. Let's see what happens when I do this. Okay, and some of this is already drying. And the blowing of the breath just allows it to go a little faster. Okay, so I'm liking what's happening, but I'm going to add a little bit of a darker, what do we got here? We got a teak wood, and we're just going to put that at the very bottom here just to ground it. And this is going to be where my tree starts. Okay. So you can see how easy that was already, just putting some colors down, just moving around. There's no wrong or right. And the beautiful thing with the Yupo paper, or the photo paper backside, is if I didn't like this, I could wipe it right off and start fresh. But I'm liking it, so we're just going to leave it as is. And this is where my tree is going to come in. All right, so at this point, I'm going to move on to some funky little tools here that I use. These guys are called a micro brush, microfiber. And it might be a little tricky to see, but at the very tip here, there's a little tiny ball of fuzz. And so the nice thing about these guys is you can get some really detailed branches. So there's a green one. And the green one here has a little bit more fluff to it, so a little bit different, but not much. So I'm going to start with the green one that has a little bit more, and I'm just going to take it straight into my little dish here of the teak wood. Now when I do a tree, I always start at the base, and I just let it flow. So I just pull up from the bottom. So I just plant my tip down, and as I'm pulling up, I lift. And there's the start of our tree. And I don't take trees too seriously. I let them just show me what they want to become. And again, just be loose. Let it happen. So I start at the bottom and I keep coming up from the same spot. And the reason I do that is because the tree at the base is the widest, and that's where I'm going to get the most ink when I touch down. And this is still wet, so I can pull this down. And you can see how the ink pushes to the side and then it creates this dark ridge. If you don't like the dark ridge, you can just go in with your microfiber brush and you can just smooth it out. Or you can leave it all gnarly if you like. Okay. And so the top is still a little bit wet, so my branch is kind of faded a little. So we're going to go back in, thicken them up. And I was told that there's always a branch on the front of a tree that comes downwards. So we got to add that guy. Okay. Now up here, this is really bloomed because there was a lot of moisture in the alcohol still. So it's going to be a thicker branch. But again, not to stress. We just let it happen. And we can always go back in there and edit those branches a little later as it dries. But these microfiber brushes are just awesome for just getting enough ink, but not too much ink. Because as you use a brush, it holds a lot more ink, right? Because you got your big tips, which are great for certain techniques. But when you're trying to do some finer detail, these little guys are the way to go. And the one thing I also want to share about alcohol inks is it doesn't have to be an expensive endeavor. It doesn't have to be something you go, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money to get started. Because it just doesn't. You can just start with a few colors, a few of your favorites. Usually colors in the same family work well together because then you really can't mess them up. They all kind of blend and merge. But then you can start adding in some new colors as you get going. And I'm just going to take my finer microfiber brush, a little bit finer tip, and just get some ink on them. And I just kind of take the excess ink off on the side of the cup. And I'm just going to come in and make some finer branches. And the more you go over the existing path is when you get all the texture coming in, because that's when the inks start getting pushed around. And that's when you start building all your dimension. And so you just keep going. And if it starts blooming too much, give her some breath. And I really like that little spot of light that's hiding behind my tree there. It looks like the sun's trying to break through the sky. And again, I'm just following these branches that I laid down in the beginning. It almost looks like it's a bit of a stormy sky. And just let these little pictures take you somewhere. And this brown, you know, it comes out in one color, and then as it mixes with the other color, it turns into many other browns. And I'm just going to make some more branches, get some more detail in my bark. Come down my main branch, my main trunk here, and just darken it up a little, get a little shadow in there. Okay. It's coming along nicely. Now at this point you can say, okay, I just want a bare tree. It's fall or winter or spring and it hasn't quite sprouted. Or you can turn this into a total leaf tree, and I'll show you how we can do that. Just going to add a little more depth here. And the beautiful thing about alcohol inks too that I really love is this piece. I can come back in 5 years from now, 1 day from now, and reactivate this ink if I don't seal it today. So that's the beauty also, is that it's never a done until you seal. So if you go, oh, well, you know, I'm not sure about that piece, you just set her aside, come back at another time and see what it's saying. Does it need more? Maybe you end up just loving it. Okay. So this girl's been around. She's an old tree. She's weathered some storms. And she's standing in all her glory. And again, don't think it out too much, just let it come. Just know that every tree is perfectly imperfect. Okay. So I think I'm going to leave that alone for a bit, and I'm going to let it dry fully. Now this already back here is fully dry. The branches are still a little bit wet, but that's how fast that evaporation happens. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of our mushroom, and we're just going to put it in one of our little cups here. And we're going to come in and we're going to make some stones down in the bottom. Get some little rocks, get a little texture coming in here so it just doesn't look like our tree's just sitting in some mud. And have fun. Just push those inks around and let them show you what they're going to do. You can always go back in and change them if you didn't like how it showed up. But the texture comes after layers of the ink. And that's when you really get to see how fun these guys can be. Okay. And maybe we'll put some little rocks down at the base of our tree here, make it look like it's got a few down below it. And I'm just going to turn this a little bit around here, just to kind of give a different perspective. And just add some more rocks into the bottom. And if you got any little white edges, just take your inks right out to the outside. Okay. Now, if you wanted to change this into a leaf tree, some people might say, don't do it. But I'm just going to do it for the purpose of showing you how to do it. So there's our basic tree that's in the winter. Now this here is a little tool. It's kind of a fun little tool. It can do lots of little fun things. So it's basically just like a Stampin' Block with a little bit of Velcro, and then this is just a felt pad that goes over top here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to decide, okay, what colors would I like to amalgamate here into my leaves. Now the other thing about these little bottles that I forgot to mention, they're meant to be left open. So they have this nice fine little spout so they can sit open until you're done, because they're made to be used rather quickly. So all I'm doing is just randomly dropping some drops. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow in there just to keep it nice and happy. We're going to come along and we're going to put in a little bit of green. And there's no method to this. I'm just dabbing down, squeezing gently, nothing too crazy. And let's go for a little flamingo, why not? All right. And then the process is just going to be tapping down. Now at first you might not see much, because it's got to eat through that ink at the back. But all of a sudden you're going to start to see it percolate, and you're going to see the ink pushing through that background. Now it is still a little tacky, so that's why it's lifting up. And all of a sudden we've gone from a barren tree to maybe a spring tree. And you can see all the little magic popping. Now the other thing you can do at this point, if you wanted something a little more, you can just take one of your Q-tips, put some ink on the tip of it, and then you can get a little more intentional that you just want some little highlights here and there. The longer you sit down, the longer you put your ink, the more ink you're going to apply. And again, each color that you add over another color gives you a whole new experience. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling happy already looking at this girl. And a little bit more yellow. And we're just going to come up and tap in some highlights. Making some more dimension. All right. I'd have to say I'm pretty happy with that one so far. So we're just going to let that girl breathe. And then I'm going to come over to the tile. Now when we're working on the tile, it's a little bit different. It's a lot smoother. You don't have to really move the ink as much. So we're still going to work the same concept of a wet on wet. So I'm just going to put some blending solution on the background. Just give her a little move around. Now you can see there's a couple little specks of yellow, but we're just going to let that be. They must have transferred over in our process here. Okay, so I'm going to play with a few different colors. Let's throw in some purples and some blues just so you can see the differences in how these colors go. So we're going to start with the darker purple at the top. And you can see already, she just likes to start moving. And then we're going to take our, what do we got here? Our sailboat blue. And we're just going to kind of come in between there and let that happen. Now again, you can just allow your tile to just rock back and forth. And then again, I always let the colors just breathe, because at the point when they come out of the bottle, they're most kind of like moist, of course. And then as the time sits and they evaporate, they start to thicken up. And that's when you can kind of really start seeing the strength in their colors and the pigments. Okay, I'm going to add a little more purple in there. And let's see, what do we got here? Gonna add in some denim. And sometimes these lids can be a little tricky to open after they've been used, so it's good to wipe them off before you put the caps back on, or otherwise they can be a little tricky. And again, you can use your brush in here to move the inks around. You can use your breath. And that's also going to speed up the process of drying. So again, whatever feels natural, or even if it doesn't feel natural, you can try it. You can use a straw. The only thing with using a straw is that a lot of condensation can come out. So you just have to be careful when using a straw. It's better just to use like an air can. You can use like the little dusters. So this here you can give her a blast, and that will also move your inks. You can do little short little spurts, and you can see how that just speeds up the process also. And again, you don't have to use canned air. It's just, you know, it's just an option. All right, so now I'm saying to myself, okay, what do I need? Well, I need something that's going to contrast, so I think we're going to go in with some green, and we're going to make it like we've got maybe a meadow happening here. And again, I'm a nature lover, so I always just kind of say, okay, you know, just look around and you'll see all the beauty. Now what I did is I just touched in with my dirty brush, which isn't the end of the world. I just went and cleaned her, so I get my green back to nice and fresh. And there we go. Okay, so we're popping in some green, and I think maybe we should have a little bit of water. So this is going to be like a little lake down here. There we have it. The lake's in. And I always like using a bit of a dirty brush because then I get more color blending out of it, more dimension. So you don't always have to clean your brush, but if you like your brush clean, then go with it. Get it. All right, so now I got a little spot here where the ink is kind of pushed away, and I'm just going to come back and I'm going to drop in some purple right in that spot where it pushed out. And you can see it just blooms, and then it makes a bit of a hard edge around it. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean that brush off, and we're just going to kind of work this in so that it doesn't just look like a big blob right in the middle. And sometimes it's like, oh no, and it's just like, it's okay, don't panic. Just let it happen, just pull those colors around and just see what's going to do. Okay, and I think that flamingo needs to come in here and create a bit of a horizon line. There, let's see what that does. So you can see already the lighter colors are a little higher in isopropanol and less pigment, so they push the darker colors, and that's where you get these dark lines. Sometimes the dark lines work, and sometimes you need to move them around just to blend them out. But I think we're getting a pretty cool effect from this. Okay. So it almost looks like I got some mountains happening in the back here. And I got some beautiful glowy sunset colors coming from somewhere. Okay. And with the tiles, I just pull my inks right to the edges, and then usually when I'm finished them, I'll just take a little bit of acrylic paint and makeup sponge, and I just drag along the edges and just finish that up. Okay, so just again to give a different perspective here. Just gonna flip that around, and you can always just paint your edges the same color as your inks if you like that are on the surface, but I find the black just gives it more of a finished look. You can do really any color on the outside. Okay, so again, I'm gonna go add my tree. All right, so I feel like I got a lake, I got me some nice grassy meadows, and then I almost have like a neon mountain. So I'm going to come back over. So this ink here is pretty much dried, and the beautiful thing is there's no ink that's wasted. You just take a little bit of your blending solution, put it in there, and she's good to go all over again. Give her a little mix, and back we go. So again, I'm going to do my tree. I'm going to do this tree a little different. I'm going to start her over at the side so it looks like it's kind of coming in. And again, tap off if you think you got a little too much ink on there. So I'm going to start over in my corner here, and I'm going to start at the bottom. And I start at the bottom just so the blooming can happen at the bottom mainly. And I'm just going to pull this little tree up from the side here. And I come back from the same place I started and just follow it up. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I get my desired outline of my tree. And the more you go over it, like I said, it just allows you to build up that texture. get that trunk. And just lift up as you come to the end so your brushes get a little tapered. I'm going to switch over to the tiny microfiber, the little fine one, just to get a little more detail. Okay. And I just keep going until the tree looks like I like it. Doesn't have to look perfect, doesn't have to be like balanced in any way, because every tree has weathered its own storm. And again, just let it happen, and the more you do trees, the more you're going to fall in love with them. At first I was like, oh my goodness, that just looks like a big old stubby finger or something. And the more I kept doing it, the more they just would come to life. So again, just take your finer microfiber brush and just drag it to the outer edges of the tile. And just let them kind of show you what they want to do. Add some extra little tiny branches in there just to make her look a little more balanced. Okay. Just going to get some more texture on my bark by going over the same path again. Okay. It's coming along. And I don't know, I have to be honest with this teak wood. It's one of my favorites for doing trees. It just can be light and dark all in the same. Okay. And just keep following the same paths. And you're going to find all of a sudden you've got this beautiful textured bark. And you can make your base a little wider. Have it come right down like it's right in front of the lake. And again, these microfibers just work so great for this finer detail. And just allow you to kind of give some extra little finer branches. Can add some shadows in there, maybe where the trees had some a little injury. All right. Okay, and I think the water in this one really stands out, so I might give it a little bit of texture. It's looking a little too smooth. So we'll go in there and kind of work that a little bit once we get our tree happy. Okay, I like it. I think I'm going to put a little guy just over on the side here, just kind of a little tree coming up. And just so the other guy's got some balance here. And if you come up to a spot in your background that has a real thick, dark ink, you might just have to go over it a few more times to get it to lift, but it will lift. It just might take a little more working. Okay. All right, I think that's good for that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some of the alcohol by itself. Just going to clean this little guy off. Get a little bit more on there, and we're just going to play in the water. We're just going to try to give it some texture to make it look like it's got some movement going on there. And it's just a fine amount of alcohol on there, just enough to kind of break through the background. And you're just going to kind of make it look like you got some little ripples. And even though there's a little tinge of green to my ink here, or my ISO there, it's still doing its job. All right, I think I almost need like a little moon or something in here. So I'm going to take a Q-tip and I'm just going to dip it in some And my blended solution, and I'm just going to touch down. I'm going to get her a little juicier, and we're going to do a moon. So I'm just holding it in the same place, and I'm putting some pressure, and what's happening is the alcohol is just going to move. And we'll just see what happens here. See if it's going to be round or if we got to edit it. All right. So if it's moving too much, you can take the dry end of your Q-tip and just kind of go in and do some circles and clean up any of that alcohol that's just kind of still working beyond. Okay. I can go in and clean out some of that and make her a little bigger. Okay. All right. I think I'm just going to go in with a little bit of lightning on my tree with a little bit of mushroom. So I'm just going to add a little bit of mushroom to my cup and going in with my little tiny microfiber. And we're just going to kind of pull in some light into the tree bark, just so it looks like that moonlight's kind of hitting in some spots. And if it starts moving too much, just give it some breath. This guy here needs a little light because he's right by the moon. So you just kind of want to think, where would that light hit? And then just go add a little highlight there. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be there. And you're just going to add a little more light spots. Just to make it look like we got a bit of glow. And I'm just going to bring those branches a little closer to our moon. Okay. Well, we got a little gnarly spot happening there, so we'll just give this guy a new little branch there to make it look like that was all meant to be. Okay. And you can just see as you add those little highlights and lowlights, the tree just kind of comes to life. It just starts lifting off the page or the tile. All right. So we got our moon. I still think we need to work that water a little bit more here just to kind of give it a little more moon glow, but we'll get to that. Okay. I think we got the moonlight happening now on the trees. And I could have done the same thing with the lightening factor with the alcohol, but I decided to use a little bit of color just so it would build on the texture. So again, if you just wanted to use your alcohol to lighten, you certainly can. But if you have like a color that's a lighter color that has a bit of pigment, you'll just get way more tree texture, which I love. And just to see it just kind of almost happening as you touch it is just one of my loves of alcohol ink. All right, that's feeling happy. Okay, so I'm just going to clean off my little microfiber brush, and I think I'm actually going to come in with a lighter blue here into my water and see if we can't kind of jazz it up a bit. So I just kind of went in with a lighter blue, and I just kind of decided we needed a little more texture in the water. Those little lines and ripples just weren't quite cutting it. And so I'm just going to move that color around, kind of see if I can get a little more texture. Now I have this one branch that's touching the water here, so we'll see if I need to fix it after, but that's okay. And I feel like we've definitely got way more water feeling now. Okay. All right. There. That's looking way more like the moon's glowing off that. Okay. And I see my one little branch needs a little bit of attention, so we're going to fix that. All right. All right, I'm just going to flip this one around for a little different perspective. And so my moon's a little bit of a oblong shape, so I could definitely tweak that a little bit. And this tree over here could definitely have some rocks at its base. So I think that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to go and add a few rocks on that forefront. And this here is pretty much dry already. So that's how fast that happens. So if there's any questions or anything that comes up as you're watching this process, please don't hesitate to put in some comments, ask away. I love sharing information. Anything that can help somebody to achieve what they need to, I'm more than happy to help. Because a lot of my learning has just came from just trying it out. All right. So at this point, you can say you're done. And if you were done, you could go and finish your edges. You could paint them black. You could paint them any color you want. Then something that's really fascinating also about working with the alcohol inks, there are very few sealants that don't wake it back up. So the journey of alcohol inks has been a learner. So in the beginning when I started, I went to seal some of my pieces that I'd done that I was quite happy with. And then all of a sudden they started moving and blending and I was like, whoa. So what I learned is a lot of the different sprays that have a polyurethane base will wake the inks back up. So the Camar Krylon is our friend. So 2 to 3 coats of this and this all becomes permanent. Then you can go further than that. You can seal it 2 to 3 sprays, and then you can go with an epoxy 2-part resin, and you can seal them, which not so much on the paper side of life, but on the tiles or anything that's a little more stable. And then you put your resin on there, and then that whole thing is perfectly protected. So then you can use it for lots of different items, but it just really seals the artwork in there. So I feel at this point I'm satisfied with the journey of art today, and I hope you've loved experiencing the alcohol inks and seeing how I create my trees. And again, there's no bad tree. They're all beautiful. And it doesn't matter how they start, if they are lopsided, if they have gnarly branches, if they have fat branches, either way, it's a beauty. And just play, explore with the colors. There's nothing that can really go wrong. If I wasn't satisfied with these right now, I could take my blending solution, pour it all over there, and wipe her clean and start fresh. So that's another thing with the alcohol inks. As long as it's a non-porous surface, you can wipe her clean and start over. So I just want you to know that there's no wrong in alcohol inks. One thing I did bring that I haven't shared with you today is some of the alcohol ink markers. These are just basically the ink in a marker. So again, just one more technique you can add in if you feel a little less comfortable using the microfibers or the paintbrushes. You can always take one of the markers and you can just go in. Sometimes you have to work a little bit more to get them to lift the background, depending on the colors that you're using. But the markers also work fabulously for adding in detail, shading, whatever. But they're just another technique that you can add in if you don't want to, if you're not quite comfortable. The other end is a bit of a chiseled end, kind of more of a calligraphy style. And again, it has its purpose and you can go in and play with those. So between the inks, the markers, and the alcohol itself, it's an endless journey of color and experimenting. I want to thank you for joining me here today at Process Art Discovery, and I want you to know that it was a pleasure having you here today, sharing the experiences that I love, and I hope you come back and share some more time with us. I want you to maybe give us a like, a share, and a comment. It'd be greatly appreciated. Subscribe even, and we'll see you back here soon.